Welcome to Ready channel, and thank you for joining us today, Professor Armstrong. Now you are in Australia, right?
Yes.
How is the COVID-19 situation in your country?
Yes, well, I think we've done a fairly good job. In fact, compared to other countries, the numbers of infections have fallen pretty quickly. Now, we've got some confidence in those numbers, but I think we need more testing. So we're in fairly strict lockdown, but we're still allowed outside for exercise and shopping for essentials. But I think it's important we stay locked down for a while until we have more random testing and tracing ability.
You are in Canberra, no?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Okay, so let me start the interview. Professor Armstrong, you and the Professor Kobayashi, the program director of RIETI, suggesting the Japanese government to introduce the kind of the income contingent loan, which is already adopted in Australia as HELP, help.
Yes.
And what is the merit of this program? Could you explain?
I'll start by talking about the Higher Education Loan Program, HELP, or HECS, Higher Education Contribution Scheme, and then a little bit about how that loan design might be used for deploying government assistance, whether it's in Japan or other countries. So since the late 1980s, Australia has had this income contingent loan for university tuition. So when students go to university or higher education, all students are given the option of taking a loan for tuition under a HECS or HELP scheme, and about 80% of those students take it up. And this is very different from a traditional student loan because it's contingent on income. So repayment doesn't happen based on time. It's not time-based repayments alone, but graduates and those who have taken the loan only repay when they are able to. So when their income reaches a certain threshold after they finish university. So it's a very fair system. It's a very financially sustainable system for the university sector, for the government budget. And it's been adopted in New Zealand, United Kingdom, Netherlands, Hungary, a few other countries. So it's got a few merits. I'll talk about those, and then we can talk about how this might extend to government assistance during the COVID coronavirus crisis. So first, the repayment burdens, what we call the repayment burdens, are low. So if a graduate finishes university in a recession and they have a Japanese JASO scholarship or an American student loan, and they cannot find a job because we're in a recession right now, they still have to repay that loan. It might be deferred for a little bit under extreme circumstances like this, but the repayment burden will be high when they have to repay if they don't have a job or if they are low income. Whereas an income contingent loan, you will not repay until you're earning a decent salary, a decent income. And that is, so if you earn below, in Australia, it's about 45,000 Australian dollars. So it's about 30,000 US dollars a year. You don't pay anything. If you earn below that, you don't pay anything. And the maximum you pay is 10% of your income, but that's only when you're earning $135,000 a year, Australian dollars. So it doesn't put a large burden on repayment. Okay? That's the first important point. Second one is there's no default, no defaulting on the debt. So if you can't repay your student loan in the United States or Japan or Canada and other countries, you default on that debt and your credit rating is much worse. So you get a bad credit rating. That can really affect your welfare, not just now, but in the future as well. And another merit, I think, is it is very cheap and simple to administer. It is collected usually through employer withholding, just like income tax and other employer withholding fees. And so It is very simple to administer, and this is why I think and it's fair. And in Australia, we've had that system since 1989, and both sides of politics, both major political parties support it. And that's why wherever it's been introduced around the world, they've kept that system. Except for Thailand, but that's because it only lasted for less than a year with a coup d'etat.
I see.
Yeah, so one other merit I think that applies to, say, government assistance during a coronavirus crisis is that if the debt holder, or if the person with the loan, cannot repay, well, under a normal time-based loan, the government has to cover that. The person defaults and that debt never gets repaid. Whereas with an income contingent loan, if you wait 4 or 5 years or longer and that person finally gets a job or an income, then you'll collect that loan back over time. So it's never written off. But a lot of people, especially in current circumstances, may never repay that debt, may never repay that loan. And that's okay, I think, because with higher education, most governments choose to subsidize it a little bit, but also with, say, the current coronavirus crisis, the government is going to assist and give a lot of grants out and doesn't expect a lot of that money back. So I think if I just briefly, so that's the idea of an income contingent loan for higher education tuition. It's also extended for living expenses in England. In Australia, it's just tuition. But if we think about that form of loan and its features, its fairness, its simplicity to administer, the ability for government to collect some of that money back, Kobayashi-san and I thought this is a good idea, not just for higher education, but for the assistance given by government during the coronavirus crisis. And there's been a bit of a debate in Australia about this too, with prominent academics arguing for this in public. Now, Australia hasn't adopted that approach yet, but there might be more assistance, and it has been under consideration. So the idea would be, right now in the coronavirus crisis, as countries start to shut down economies and people have to be socially distancing, so staying at home, it's very difficult. A lot of people are losing jobs, but some people cannot afford to stay home. So government, obviously in Japan, 100,000 yen is being given to every citizen to help them to stay fed, paying the rent, and staying housed. So the government is giving this out as grants in Japan. The government won't get that back directly. It'll recover some of that when the economy starts to improve and start to tax more. But it's still a very expensive plan, and especially in Japan, the current assistance is not means tested. So the poor and the wealthy are all receiving the same amount. I think if you turn these into normal loans, that's not going to help at all, and nobody's suggesting that, because you'll have a lot of high repayment burden, a lot of people defaulting. But if you turn these into income contingent loans, or the next round, say, because I don't think 100,000 yen per person is going to be enough to keep people fed and housed during this shutdown. The benefit is those who are wealthy who receive this income contingent loan, or who still have an income, will repay that very quickly because it'll get taken out of their income tax. So there's not necessarily any screening that has to happen beforehand. So you can easily deploy large amounts of assistance across the economy, but recover that quickly from those who are doing well, those with high incomes. Another benefit is for those who are out of a job now, but will likely, and we hope, get another job, or get their previous job when this is over and the shutdown lifts, and we want rapid economic recovery. Well, those people will repay that debt when they are earning an income. So it'll help people when they need to be helped, and it'll have automatic budget repair, a degree of automatic budget repair when the economy is improving. You'll collect extra tax from those who it's helped as an extra levy. And this in fact, I think can be extended not just to individuals and households, but to businesses. So as a revenue contingent loan. So a lot of small and medium sized businesses have to close down. A lot of shops, a lot of restaurants, a lot of bars, of course. Now, these should be able to borrow, the argument is, and in theory this works, and I don't see why it wouldn't work, similar to university tuition, but they can borrow against, say, last year's revenue. So if they're a larger firm, they can borrow more, and of course, repay that when their revenue picks up again, when the economy takes off. So that's the idea. I think, you know, you need a few things. You need proper tax collection, you need proper institutions, you need something like a My Number, and Japan has all these, and Japan's professional bureaucracy will be able to implement something like this very easily. So that's the idea.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that this program itself seems theoretically reasonable, and systematically as well. I mean, yeah, I think the system itself is very nice, but I want to know how is the implementation, how is the people's feedback, or your students or your colleagues' feedback about this program. Could you tell me about that?
Sure. So, well, first, just on the education scheme, the income contingent loan for university tuition. At every stage, at every country where that idea is first discussed, tax collection agencies think it's a terrible idea. It's not possible to do. And that was the case in Australia as well. But even after Australia implemented this and showed it worked, and then the tax collection agency became very positive about the scheme, took ownership of the scheme, it was still very difficult in New Zealand, the United Kingdom, and elsewhere to implement. So again, where change has to occur, and an agency like tax collection agency, Ministry of Finance, it's not used to doing something like this, it's something new, it's going to be difficult to convince them and governments in general to take on this new strange looking loan design. But it has worked. It works in these countries I've mentioned. It works well. It is a more sustainable way to go forward. So how is it received? For education here, it's become normal. We're in 30 years of this system. I said 80% of people take it up when they enter university, and that's from all income groups. Now, when it comes to thinking about this for coronavirus crisis assistance, this is a new area. This is not being implemented here. As I said before, some people have argued for it here, some prominent economists, and there's Greg Mankiw in the United States, who's written a short paper that doesn't argue for exactly an income contingent loan, but a very similar system. So this is where governments are now spending, record budgets. We're in an unprecedented crisis, and I think this is where creative thinking has to happen, with a view to responsible budget repair when times are getting better. And economies will recover, and it's incumbent on us to start to think about how we can improve that recovery and make that more sustainable.
I see. Thank you very much. I think that many other countries, like as you mentioned, the UK or New Zealand, already adopted this system. And I believe that Japan has a chance to introduce the fund. But do you think that what is the difficulty to introducing this system in Japan from your experience in Australia? Because as you mentioned, it has some problem about the system and the institution itself is required to implement this system in Japan. So what is your opinion about yes?
Yeah, well, I guess first just separating out the higher education issue from the coronavirus assistance issue. On higher education, you know, importing a system from another country as it is never works. It has to be adjusted for Japan's circumstances, Japan's context. And we've done some important work on this and thinking through, well, a lot of Japanese women drop out of the workforce once they have children and re-enter only as casual or, you know, less secure, non-regular employees. So having to think about some of those labour market conditions is important. So I think that's the first barrier when thinking about importing a system from the outside. Now, those are all issues that can be overcome. When thinking about this kind of income contingent loan, and there is a vast literature on this, when thinking about this for pushing out government assistance, I think it is two things. The biggest barriers, it is new, so a lot of thinking will have to go into it quickly by Ministry of Finance and other key government ministries. And there might be some opposition to it, but this is really a crisis time where new things have to be debated and discussed. And so there's a real chance to think about, well, you know, instead of just giving 100,000 yen to every citizen again and again, which might be the amount that's required, why don't we make them conditional repayment, conditional on income? So that's the first thing. I think it's trying to think of a new system and implementing that. The second one is, if that is decided and somewhat successfully pushed through and becoming implemented, a big thing is to educate the public. So this is not a traditional loan. So people will have to be, it'll have to be explained clearly over and over again to people that this is a grant. It's really a loan that you only repay when you're able to. It's not a loan that you have to worry about. Now, with the higher education loan in Australia, the HEX system, it is interesting because you might take time out of the labour market here to look after a sick relative or to open a business. You might have a year or two or longer with low income. You might have a gap. Say you leave the labour market to raise children. People here don't think of it as debt. It doesn't chase them. You don't have to worry about it. You forget about your student loan debt. You only start to pay a little bit back when you'll start earning again later on. So that public education campaign is going to be quite important if this is being thought about in Japan.
Okay, thank you so much for your very insightful presentation and explanation. This is my last question. In the interview with Professor Kobayashi, he said that this program is not a loan. Yes, just as you said, this is not a loan. The investment from the government to the people who are facing the financial difficulties. So what is your comments on the Professor Kobayashi's mentioning?
That's a very good way to think about it and a very good way to look at it. And that will have to be part of the public education that I mentioned, that people should not see this as a loan, a traditional loan that can be thought of as an investment in people. And you know, an investment in a broad or across the economy, really. And as I mentioned before, those who are able to pay it back quickly because they have high incomes will pay it back quickly. Those who will take longer to repay it will repay it when they're able to later on. And some people will never be able to repay it, but they need that support so that they can socially distance, so they can keep themselves fed and housed during this crisis. Now, I think that seeing it as an investment in people who need it, think about loans and investment and payoff, it's a very good way to think about it because it's a fair scheme across society. And I think another benefit is being able to push it out quickly because you don't need as much pre-screening as unemployment benefits, for example. So it's really a much more responsible way for a government to be assisting the community. I think I just finally say that, you know, we've not seen a crisis like this in our lifetimes. We've got some experience recently with the Lehman shock and the Asian financial crisis, but those are very different crises. So this has new features where we don't want to just be giving a whole lot of money and stimulus to the economy so that people are out shopping and spending money. That's not what we want. We don't want people shopping and spending money. We need people at home. We need businesses to close temporarily, but to be able to cover their overhead costs. So they have to still be able to pay the rent, and ready for them to open up when the health crisis is over. Because we have a lot of healthy businesses now that we're not doing anything wrong, have healthy balance sheets, very profitable, that are going to have to shut for the name in the sake of getting the health crisis under control, resolving the health crisis. And I think economists are very clear on this, both in Australia, the United States, and elsewhere. Economists are pushing for strict lockdowns and keeping the lockdowns in place until we have mass testing and randomized testing and tracing, and only opening up economic activity once the health crisis is over, and assisting through fiscal policy, through government assistance. And I think that's, you know, with very different circumstances in different countries, but I think that's sort of the general principles to proceed on, and to include then an income contingent loan in this environment will allow the government to help push out more money, more support, and then when the health crisis is resolved and we're reopening our economy, to pump out even more money, but to also recoup that money from those when they're doing well, without slowing down that recovery.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I think that we should regard people's brain and goodwill as collateral, which was to invest. One more question. What is your imagination about after Corona, the world? Because Thomas Friedman commented that in the New York Times that before Corona and after Corona is totally different world. So do you think that it became the better world or worse? What is your opinion?
Well, I hope it becomes a better world, but I worry deeply that it'll become a worse world, and oversimplifying, but already there were some pretty dangerous trends in the world with US, China, strategic competition, and multilateralism breaking down. Now, this global pandemic and economic crisis could bring the world together and cooperate and find a better way out of this. And it could mean a revival of multilateralism. But so far, we're not seeing any signs of that. The global institutions, WHO, is being questioned. The G20 is being ineffective thus far. So it doesn't look very hopeful. And when there's such a big economic downturn across so many countries, including in the United States, where the health crisis is not yet under control, and it could be a very deep and prolonged recession. That, you think about the interwar period in the 1930s, didn't lead to anything good. It led to more protectionism. It led to more breakdown in international cooperation. So I worry deeply about the direction we're headed, and it's incumbent on countries to try to find ways. It's a global problem, to cooperate and find global solutions. I think that's the only way out of this, where we'll have a sustained recovery.
Professor Kobayashi mentioned that this would be a good opportunity to change this disparity world. So he said during the World War II, World War I and World War II, both, it was a good opportunity to mitigate the people's differences. So Professor Kobayashi hopes that this will become the good chance to change the world in a good way.
Yeah, and there is a lot of opportunity for that because a lot has changed already and a lot will change. And big events like Kobayashi-san mentioned, the previous world wars, have led to big shifts in distribution in society. So it's a chance. It's really the only time that's easy to have really large taxation of those who are quite well off in society and shift that to spread across society more. And we're already seeing that, in fact, because a lot of the fiscal policy, a lot of the fiscal stimulus that governments are pushing out are unprecedented. These are huge packages. It's going to be very difficult to rein all of that in and then to have budget repair over time without looking at big options of shifting, of redistribution within society. So there necessarily will be very big changes. And I think it's an opportunity to make some changes like that so we have more equal, more equitable societies and reduce inequality. So there is of course hope, and I think this is a once in a lifetime and more chance to, it's a very big shock, very big crisis internationally, but this is when good things and bad things can happen, and it's up to us, I think, globally, to make sure they're better than they are worse.
Yes, it's up to us. Thank you very much. Yeah. Yes, let's change the world in a good way. Thank you very much, and I look forward to talking with you again soon. Please take care of yourself in Canberra.
Thank you very much, Sobi-san. I hope everyone's safe and takes care in Japan. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for watching this video. This is Rieti channel. Please subscribe.